Tunde yelled at his wife. "It's over between us. Go and find the father of that bastard." "I wish you two a happy ever after," he bellowed and stormed out of the restaurant, leaving Abigail to wallow in humiliation. With a loud groan, Abigail attempted to push the infant once more. Despite the unbearable discomfort, she persisted. She mustered the strength and pushed once more, her husband Tunde holding her hands and the nurses cheering her on. At last, the child emerged. With a feeble smile on her face, she sighed with relief as she sat back on the stretcher, the sound of the baby's cry resonating throughout the hospital. Abigail looked up at that moment, seeing the nurses' bewildered expressions. There was a look of disappointment on her husband's face as he drew back from the baby. She sat up in a panic, demanding to know what was going on. She was then given her baby in her arms. She was shocked by what she was seeing, and her eyes grew wide. There was a gorgeous white baby boy in her arms. Given that Tunde and Abigail were black, this was shocking. When Abigail looked up to Tunde, his irate expression was one of scorn and agony. She attempted to implore him with her eyes that she shared his amazement, but he refused to listen. The couple was left alone after the nurses left the ward with the infant. Tunde was totally engulfed in anger. Abigail defended herself by swearing she was innocent when he accused her of being unfaithful. Abigail begged him to get a DNA test instead of making unfounded allegations. Tunde adamantly declined, saying he didn't want to pay to suffer more injuries and that the evidence was sufficient. When the debate reached its zenith, Tunde whirled around and stormed out of the ward. The argument was getting hotter. Lazily, tears streamed down Abigail's face. She could not even cry. This was excessive. Rather than being given time to recuperate after giving birth, she had spent all of her energy arguing with Tunde. She kept wondering how the baby ended up as white. Neither of Tunde's parents were white, nor were hers. So how come? It was puzzling to her, but irrelevant. It was her baby, and it was beautiful. Abigail and her infant were allowed to leave the hospital and go home a week later. Tunde didn't visit her or the baby once throughout that entire week in the hospital. She was aware that he was still angry, but all they had to do was do a DNA test to establish her innocence. Abigail made the decision to go back home and meet Tunde there after realizing he never did. However, Tunde refused to even look her in the eye. He totally cut himself apart from their infant. He never touched the food she cooked. No matter what she did to appease him or get him to talk to her, he hasn't spoken anything to her since she came back. When he did speak, it was primarily to yell at her when something she didn't go right. One evening he had returned from work and was just in his room working on some documents on his laptop when he heard a noise. He was certain it emerged from the kitchen since it sounded like smashing glass. To find out what was going on, he bolted from his bed and into the kitchen. Tunde hurried into the kitchen to meet his wife by the sink, where Abigail's left index finger was submerged in the running water from the faucet. He peered down and saw broken plate fragments scattered all over the floor next to where the rack had been. His eyes were filled with anger. Why are you unable to do one thing correctly? After bringing that bastard and claiming it was our child, you now want to demolish my entire home. You can't even cheat right. You had to do it with a white man, Tunde barked, adding a string of colorful names to further his point. And as the tears started to fall, Abigail bit her lip. His remarks hurt. When Tunde saw her quiet, he gave her a contemptuous glance, let out a loud hiss, and walked away. Crying, Abigail collapsed on the ground. Her heart hurt so much. That he gave up on her so quickly hurt too much. The agony increased due to his unyielding refusal to do the DNA test, which, when paired with the hormonal fluctuations and lack of sleep following childbirth, proved to be intolerable for her. For months, everything went on in this manner. Tunde went to sleep in the guest room, leaving Abigail and the infant in the room. When he heard the baby's loud cry, he would simply storm into the room, accusing and criticizing Abigail for not being able to handle her baby. Abigail kept pushing and hoping things would get better and it would all be fine in the end. Despite it all, she loved her baby so much and still considered him a blessing. She named him Moses and never blamed him for the problems she faced. When Tunde got home from work one day much earlier, he saw his wife nursing their son. He approached her somberly, stepped to her side, and got down on one knee. Startled to observe this, Abigail pulled back a little, holding her infant close. She became tense right away since she didn't know what was happening. He then started apologizing for treating her in an inappropriate manner. Abigail looked shocked. She was relieved that her infant was still sucking on her breasts, even if she still didn't know what was going on. She turned away and chastised Tunde for not believing in her, but he begged for forgiveness, saying that he had let his rage get in the way of his judgment, which she granted. Tunde then suggested they go out with their baby. It was a good way to reunite after so long. That gave Abigail great relief, and she quickly dressed both herself and the infant Moses. They got into a car with Tunde, and Tunde took them to a beautiful restaurant. When they walked into the restaurant, Abigail was taken in by the breathtaking view. She told Tunde how much she appreciated his thoughtfulness, and he smiled back. They located a beautiful location and took a seat. Tunde made their order and summoned a waitress. They started eating and cracking jokes together. Everything was going well until a waitress approached their table. Surprised to see her, Tunde and Abigail wondered why she was there. She was so curious that she apologized for breaching their privacy. Then she inquired about the baby's identity, name, and parentage. Abigail saw that Tunde instantly looked down, as though the question had offended him. She started questioning Abigail. She had just answered the inquiry when she saw the look of bewilderment on the woman's face as she confirmed that Moses was indeed their son. Abigail was unmoved, though. She gave the inquisitive woman a sharp look, smiled, and returned her attention to her husband. She was proud of her kid. He still had his head lowered. She considered ways to make things more playful. The curious woman ruined everything. She jerked and looked up in horror as there was a loud smack on the table, interrupting her thoughts. She found Tunde standing up, fist placed on the table with a boiling face. She became scared, wondering what was going on. "You cheat!" he barked, and Abigail's eyes widened in bewilderment. What had this nosy lady done? "I only brought you out here to see the embarrassment you've brought me with that bastard in your hands," he hollered, drawing the attention of other diners. Abigail bowed in shame. So all along his intentions were just to humiliate her publicly. She couldn't believe this was happening to her. She decided to leave with her face bowed. Moses in her arms, she quickly packed her things and tried getting up, but was forcefully put down by Tunde. She screamed as he approached her angrily and pulled her hair. "I am speaking with you! You have no right to walk away from me! Who is the baby's father? Who is the white baby's father?" he shouted. But while he gripped her hair violently, Abigail continued to cry out in agony and scream. When other diners had to step in, Tunde dropped her hair and gave her a fierce look. While crying, Abigail put her hand behind her hair in an attempt to ease the agony. This was simply excessive. Her infant even started to wail, as if he realized what was happening. "Look at you! You smell so dirty! Oh, it's over between us. Go and find the father of that bastard. I wish you two a happy ever after," he bellowed, and stormed out of the restaurant, leaving Abigail to wallow in humiliation. Abigail began living as a single mother. Having to care for her child while working was difficult. It was agony for Moses. Her pay was not very high. She started to appear sicker and more fragile. Whenever someone tried to find out how she was doing, or if she needed assistance, she would always respond that everything was good. She was not looking to win sympathy. She also didn't want to cause anyone else any concern. Each person struggled with their own problems. She ought not to supplement someone else's. So she continued to struggle, hoping that one day everything would be all right. Months went by, with nothing changing. Abigail noticed Moses had a cough one day. She tried to stop it by getting him a cough prescription, but it didn't seem to work. Rather, it progressed to a fever. After growing dubious, Abigail made the decision to bring him to the hospital. It was there that Abigail was devastated to learn that Moses had pneumonia. It was just going to grow more difficult. What would she do with all of this? But Moses remained elusive to her. She would not have persisted without him. She looked to him for hope. She chose to finally get in touch with Tunde for that reason. It had been since the incident at the restaurant that she hadn't spoken to him. She knew his mind was set, and the shame was too great, so there was no need to beg or try reasoning with him. She had willingly signed the divorce papers when his lawyers brought them to her. She had endlessly wet her pillow with tears, but that was all she could do. But now it seemed Tunde might be Moses's only chance to stay alive. She decided to reach him by sending him a text message, praying desperately that he would be considerate this time. After all, he had had some time to cool down. Picking up her phone with trembling hands, she sent him the text. "Our son is sick. I have never cheated on you. Moses is your son, and he's ill. One day you'll regret not holding on to him if we lose him. Please give me your trust. I require your assistance." Both of us do. Only 3 days later did Tunde respond. When Abigail noticed the notification on her phone, her heart gave a start. Her heart shattered as she fully read the message on her phone. "Move around. What happens to that white boy doesn't concern me." She read, "That thing did not come out of me," and started crying. Still, she persisted. She made the decision to turn to moms for support. She borrowed money from friends and even co-workers at work after depleting all of her funds. She didn't care anymore. She just couldn't lose Moses. Thankfully, Moses was treated, and the condition was abated. But due to her inefficiency at work, weeks after Moses's recovery, Abigail lost her job. She cried and begged her MD, trying to get him to understand that it had been hard on her as a single mother and her son had just recovered. Abigail begged to be given time to improve and do better, but her MD was having none of it. He claimed he had tendered her many queries, but it seemed she wasn't taking him seriously. Her other co-workers sympathized with her, but that was all they did. Thankfully, one of them told her about a single mother's forum her friend hosted and the testimonies from that forum. She advised Abigail to give it some thought. Abigail started attending the forum. The women there were so accommodating and they seemed joyful. When Abigail heard the stories of some women, she marveled at their strength. Gradually, she began to heal and began looking for a new job. When she related this to the women there, they told her not to worry and helped her find the remote job that paid really well. Abigail couldn't be more grateful. She can now afford to properly take care of her baby and herself. It all seemed surreal. The bleak future was starting to get clear. She started taking Moses to the park on Sundays, where she would just sit and watch the other children play. She once left him to play with a girl who appeared to be a little older than him so that she could grab an ice cream. She decided to go acquire one for herself and her son after developing a sudden appetite. Upon returning, she discovered he was no longer in the same place she had left him.